do you think that in the younger players coming out, doesn't matter what instrument, that they have a lot more facility than sort of we did at that age, but maybe have some less substance to it and less ability to tell a story or anything like that? Because I hear a lot of people talking about that, and I just want to get your opinion on that, especially when you're in the trenches, you're teaching.
No, absolutely. No,
Yeah.
you're 100% right. You hear about that a lot, and I think it's totally true.
I want to welcome my guest, Rez Abbasi. Rez is a fantastic guitarist and composer residing here in New York. He has recorded around 15 albums that I know of as a leader, and is currently a faculty member at the New School, also here in New York. He's a recipient of the 2021 Guggenheim Award, which maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that. And I really like how he is pushing the boundaries in jazz and has developed his own unique voice in jazz improvisation and composition. Rez, you should be really proud of the concept that you have developed in creating something different and unique. Kudos.
Well, thank you. I mean, I appreciate all that. I mean, I try not to think like that, but because then we start becoming self-aware and all that. And I it's really about just sticking to what, your intuitive sense of what the music should be, I guess.
Right.
or not, or should not be in equal manner. And once that happens, continually play and open your mind to things, and hopefully the end result and the process will be a beautiful experience altogether.
Right. And I think anyone that takes this seriously, this thing we call music, understands that on some level that you don't want to take yourself too seriously, and unless you have some kind of disorder or something mentally.
Yeah. For sure, which most of us do, actually.
because
I mean, being a jazz, wow, musician of any sort takes a sort of a different person than society's used to anyways in the first place. So
yeah, I mean, just the music itself humbles you.
Totally. The music itself humbles you, and you humble yourself, and other people humble you, and it's a feedback. It's a loop. It's never like you're just the only one putting stuff out there. It's sort of like, it's a collective experience, and that's the beauty of it. But also, you can get caught up in that with the competitive thing and all that. So it's there's pluses and minuses, and you have to be really aware of what you're doing here.
Yeah, maybe I wasn't born with that competing gene. It's nothing that I'm at all interested in.
No, exactly. But it's natural in a sense when you're working in a collective sense and you're seeing everybody else play. I don't mean competitive in sort of a
like a sports kind of a way.
Yeah, I don't mean it like who wins and all that. I mean, in a way, a good competition. Like, wow, I love the way this guy plays or this girl plays.
More like inspiration, like born out of inspiration, right?
Yeah. Why do I suck so much? And then that whole thing. So more perfect, more out of inspiration. But sometimes what I'm saying is you have to be careful because it may cross the line without you even knowing.
Right.
The very subconscious element in us that happens. And I think it's natural in a way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, our ancestors and cavemen and all those people, they must have been competitive to just live in general.
Yeah.
And so luckily that's not our case, but
maybe you can talk about where you grew up and how you got playing music.
Basically I was born in Pakistan. I was 4 years old when we migrated to California. And if you can imagine, I'm sure you've been to Los Angeles. That's where I was raised. And there's a scene out there, especially in the 70s and 80s. 80s when I started music. And there was a lot of rock and roll to be had, and in pop music, and LA was really, a very good fertile ground for all that. So experiencing that on the radio and in clubs was a great experience, just to see what music's about in the first place, just like the interaction between, crowds and live musicians, for instance. And then after that, basically jump way ahead, and I discovered jazz when I was 16. And through a friend of mine who was, who sort of changed from rock to jazz. And I was like, kind of like, confused, like, why would you do that? And
Right.
change from rock, becoming this, playing for all these parties, and into like, playing solo guitar at a restaurant or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously when I got into it, I realized, okay, there's, at 16 years old, there's a lot of material to get down with jazz and to keep working a lifetime with, and to go to college with, actually, because at 16, that's the time you got to make, 16 or 17, you got to make a change in life. Like, am I going to continue playing clubs and be a rock star, or which,
Right.
that's really funny to think about like that.
Right.
Or am I going to study, the greats and classical music and all this? And so that was an obvious choice.
Yeah, I kind of missed out on the classical world. I I
Yeah.
started, just guitar lessons on a Saturday afternoon kind of thing, at 7. And then by the
Oh,
time
well,
I was 12, I was gigging.
well, that's what I wasn't doing that at
Yeah.
12. My God, that's what kind
Yeah.
of gigs were you doing?
Country music.
Oh, well,
And I
we all know about those flat pickers now.
yeah, that's why that bluegrass, and because I
Yeah.
played banjo a little bit too.
Oh, that's amazing, man.
And so anyway, like, not to get too into me, but
Oh,
mine was a very different thing. Instead of discovering it, like watching people play, I was up there sort of doing it and getting a taste of, like, learning on the bandstand was a huge thing. Yeah.
I mean, I wish I had more of that at a young age too. And my thing was, with rock, I was on the bandstand all the time, playing
Right.
parties and, cover tunes and maybe some originals. But with jazz, it was sort of like, in the school, you play with people, or,
Right.
you play at home, or with records, which is all great too. As a lot of people start like that,
Yeah.
especially these days.
You
But
have to
yeah,
start somewhere.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, fast forward, I went to USC for a couple of years, which was a great guitar program there. But I also studied a lot of classical music there, and composed and whatnot. And then I realized I wasn't playing enough in LA. So back to your point, that I was kind of like, man, I'm studying my butt off. I mean, just like all day long
Right.
music, for a couple of years. But then I really went through sort of a mild depression, thinking like, okay, what am I doing with all this stuff if I'm not playing it?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of a young guy trying to get ahead as quick as possible. We are very impatient at that age, some of us.
Yeah, and I think we're
And
relatively around the same age. I think we grew up around the same time, I think.
yeah, I'm mid 50s. Yeah. So
Yeah, same here. Yeah.
yeah, so it's so that kind of thing, I realized, and I had a teacher, Joe Diorio, who was amazing, and also a bassist, Terry Plumeri, who
Okay.
played with John Abercrombie, and they both said, wow, you really have like a New York thing happening. And of course, at 20 years old, 21, I had no idea what that meant.
Right.
Like, what does that mean? Like, I'm just playing Charlie Parker and Benson, and I'm trying to emulate my heroes basically at that
I guess
point.
they meant you have a foundation in bebop.
Yeah, well, yeah, but the thing is, LA is more of a bebop town than New York. I mean, New York is surely is bebop also, but
Right.
no, there were plenty of students that were playing great bebop
Mhm.
in school. So I think it was more of a Jim Hall approach, I would say, because that's around 20, I discovered Jim Hall, and I was just all in, like 100%, like nothing else mattered but Jim Hall.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
that's what I thought.
I consider Jim probably the grandfather of modern jazz guitar, really.
I mean, 100%.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, of course, yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, if you go back to Charlie Christian, you can say that to him too, because what he was doing was phenomenally ahead of his time back then. So
Totally.
and everything just sort of galvanizes from there, and it sort of evolves. So there's no real break in the chain, if you ask me, but I do know what you mean. If you know,
Well, there was kind of a little bit of a shift somehow. We're just bringing in more modern type sounds, probably because of his classical background and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And I wouldn't even. I mean, Jim, you know, his sound was more modern in a way, but it wasn't like about reverbs and all this stuff.
Right.
What we think of modern sounds. I mean, Jim's sound, you know, he tucked down the tone a little bit, and he got a warmer sound. And then what he played was actually more modern than some of the guys. But it was like I went through my George Benson phase, and then when Jim Hall hit, and then George Benson includes like Pat Martino, and you know, that whole burn kind of really beautiful swinging straight down the pike thing, and you need that. I felt like I needed it, and then when Jim Hall came, it was just like this idea of texture just hit me over the head. I thought, my God, you know, it's not all about eighth notes.
Right.
You know, it's about like, I mean, not that the others weren't doing this, but not as much as Jim. It's about telling a story.
Right. And then you can tell a story playing that other way too, but it's just, I know what you mean. It's different. Yeah.
It's very different. You know, it's very different. You can tell a story, but it's sort of one or two character story. You know, it's sort of like, it is like a genre, and that's it. But Jim is sort of like multi-genre in one, you know, and
right.
that's it. And that's what I prefer as a player. But hey, I mean, Benson's birthday was just yesterday, I think, or day before.
Yeah.
And I revisited a solo that I did when I was 18, just for fun. You know, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to post this. I posted it on my Facebook, and I listened to that solo again. Oh my God, it is pretty it's pretty mind-boggling.
Yeah.
You know, and it is mind-boggling. And
especially when he was probably playing like that when he was 19, 20 years old too.
Yeah, I mean,
or not much different.
Well, yeah, I think he must have been a good 35 when he did this record, but that's still young. But yeah, it was sort of not early Benson, but it was mid Benson, I think. And so that was intriguing to listen to that after so many years. And I really had that solo down. I played it probably like 80 times with the record, just because it was not because I wanted to prove to myself anything, but I just loved it. It was one of those things. And sometimes you lose that I find as I got older, I lost some of the love. You know, I was more in tune with progressing and evolving than the love of the music. You know how that happens?
No, I know. I totally know what you mean.
Yeah, and it's a weird thing. Because when listening back to that Benson solo, I was like, God, you know, back then I was in a different state of mind, man. I just wanted to hear that and feel it. And now it's like, am I doing anything modern? Am I? So yeah, not now, but I mean, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, I was like, how am I going to grow? And none of that stuff mattered back then for me. It was just all about sound and feel.
So if your older self could have told your younger self at that time, when you were at least 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when you were like, how am I modern enough? Am I progressing enough or whatever? You probably, without putting words in your mouth, you probably would have said, look, you're going to grow anyway if you just work on the stuff that you dig. I would imagine, right?
Yeah. It's sort of a paradigm situation here. It's sort of like, you know, I'm going to grow anyway, but how am I viewing it through my senses and through myself, basically?
Right.
And the paradigm kind of shifted as I went to college, because like I said, I was 18 when I did that solo and a couple other solos, and listening back to it just brought me right back. It's like when you smell a food of some sort, you're like, oh man, or a perfume. Remember that? My God, when I was, you know, 20 years old, I used or I dated a woman that had that perfume on her, something like that.
Right.
You know, something of that sort. So this was sort of a nostalgic feeling that came alive. And you know, so when I would basically say that the paradigm shifted a little bit in the sense that things got more serious in my head where back then was just all about fun and humanity, and just, wow, this is so cool.
Yeah, I was
And I think
probably
that happens to a lot of people.
yeah, and then I think at least with me, there's different periods of different kinds of seriousness too.
Well, there you go. Yeah,
Yeah, but the first shift was probably around 20,
exactly.
something like
Yeah,
that. That was where like I'm gonna get really serious. Like I thought I was serious before, but now
right.
I'm really gonna get serious.
Yeah. Now, how can I become as good as Benson instead of, which
Yeah,
is impossible, but like, how can I even come like, 30-40% close to that level?
right.
And that takes a little bit more than, taking people's solos and playing them, right? So that's where it ends up going.
Who do you consider to be your biggest influence or influences?
Well, I mean, Jim Hall on guitar,
Yeah,
and then all the people he influenced, of course, all the guys we know about Sco and Frizzell and Martini,
the Abercrombie.
Abercrombie,
Yeah,
Goodrich, I'm probably leaving out some, but these kinds of players that I feel like also kind of are on that sort of paradigm of telling a story, in a sense, like it's kind of post bebop,
yeah,
and it's not that bebop didn't tell a story, of course it did, but we're talking about nuance here.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean Jim Hall, and then those guys. I think obviously Coltrane, that's he influenced everybody, and uh, all the players that he influenced. It's sort of like it comes down from the top, and of course Parker, and then I think a big one really is Keith Jarrett. That's maybe it he could be my biggest influence if I had to
Right.
put it in that sense, just because the vastness that he's uh, you know that he's delivered in his career, and the all the different points he's touched, and how he develops, like he's a kind of a question and answer type of musician. He does one record and then he needs to answer it with something really different,
Mm.
because that's the natural state for him. It's like if he feels like playing standards one time, then he'll play a solo thing, and then he'll do a record of his own, spirits, that record Spirits, where he did, took drums and flutes and all kinds of things, and he said he really just needed to be alone and do that. So I appreciate the value he brings to uh, his own integrity, and what he really feels, instead of listening to what sort of other people have told, are telling you to do or whatever.
Do you think that he's influenced on with you in that way too? Like when how you think about when you come up with concepts for different albums and stuff?
I mean, I guess it's a good question. I would say maybe, but I feel like what he does is a natural. So I don't know if it's his influence. I just think that's natural. So there's no influence in being natural, right?
Right.
But
Other
I think
than maybe just a reminder that hey, I can do that too.
right, but then it kind of, yeah, right. I mean, that's after the fact reminder.
Right.
When I look back, I go, oh, maybe that's. But to me, it's a natural thing to do that than to do the same kind of records over and over again that so many people. I mean, you listen to some of the greats, and nothing wrong with that, but that's not my. I don't feel like the growth factor is quite there as much as it can be with some of the players that I love.
Right. Well, to kind of go back to that same topic, someone that I'm pretty sure that we both have admiration for is Eddie Van Halen.
Oh yeah, you mentioned, yeah, of
Yeah.
course, that's,
And
yeah.
then he influenced me in many more ways than just musically. Like that's what I meant by giving you the permission to do stuff. Like I used to work on guitars and build guitars because I just thought that was a natural extension of
Wow,
doing
that's
stuff
great.
that he would do, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And just had that going for it sort of vibe, you know what I mean?
Oh,
Without
absolutely.
really thinking about it, like not reflecting, like, maybe I'll do the same thing that he did, and you know what
No,
I
that's
mean?
what I'm talking
It was
about.
just like a normal thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean by natural. When it's natural,
Okay.
there's no questions that have to be asked. I mean, it's just natural.
Right.
You don't have to think about it.
Do,
It's
do
like
you,
breathing or something.
how has Eddie influenced you?
I mean, this is interesting. I mean, because of course I stopped listening to him when I was about 16, but before that it was a lot of him, and a few of these other guys. But there are some people in life for all of us that uh, sort of show us what the potential of something can be. Coltrane was obvious one, like he's the pinnacle of that, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, that's what the potential of humanity can be. So if you know that, then you have room to grow, and you don't have to be limited. I think you know there are a few more, of course, as many, and I think Van Halen was absolutely one of them. Eddie, when you hear him, or when I heard him when I was 16 or so, 15 or so, and I was already playing a lot of stuff. Maybe I was early; it was 14, but I thought, my God, now I know what I need to work towards, not to sound like him, but if I want to be on any kind of level up there, then that's the potential. And then,
Right.
of course, check this out. This is a really interesting situation that happened to me. I've mentioned it a few times, but when I was 16, my friend took me to a concert that he said, if you like Van Halen, you got to come to this concert. And it was Alan Holdsworth.
It's so weird that you brought Alan Holdsworth up because something similar, well, different, but it involves Alan Holdsworth too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but it even gets deeper than this. So this is when I was making my transition. I was still a Van Halen freak, and I was just starting jazz, so I didn't even really know much about it. So this guy brought me to Alan Holdsworth, and of course, I was just like, completely blown away. I mean, beyond belief. And as it turns out, he had a guest that night, and it was Eddie Van Halen.
Mhm.
And so I was doubly blown away. And it's funny because that was in '83, something like that, and '82, I don't know. And it's on YouTube.
Oh,
Someone
cool.
else was on there with the camera, and they were, and Alan Holdsworth was, showing like, hey, this is my friend Eddie Van Halen, and I could swear I can hear myself like, oh, wow. But I don't know if it was me, but it was really breathtaking. So that was a really neat, like, okay, I love Van Halen, but man, Holdsworth kind of played circles around him in the sense of the filter through a 16-year-old. It
Right.
wasn't like anybody plays circles around Van Halen. You can't. I mean, that's his style. That's, how do you play circles around that? But when you're 16, technique is such a big factor,
Yeah.
when you're young. And so when I saw Holdsworth, it was just like, man, there's more technique here than than 10 Eddie Van Halens. It's amazing.
Right.
And then the next concert I went to was Joe Pass.
Cool. I
And
can
Joe,
see
I could have been before that actually, but yeah,
the lines
that
are sort of getting blurred of what
yeah.
that's cool.
I mean,
Uh,
Joe Pass has got all the technique in the world too, so it's like, oh my God, head blown, 2 or 3 times in a couple months.
yeah, while living in northern Canada, I didn't get a chance to see uh, Eddie play. I probably would have had to
Wow.
travel to Toronto or something like that. You know what I mean? Um,
Should have done it, man.
yeah, or well, it's kind of hard when you're like when I first discovered Eddie, it was through another guitar player at school that was playing in that style. And I'm like, what the hell is he doing? Because I'm just like kind of stuck in the country thing. And then my first guitar hero would have been Chet Atkins,
Oh well, I mean,
right?
God, I mean, he's
Then
outrageous
Eddie
too.
then Eddie Van Halen after that, you know what I mean? And then
Yeah,
later Lenny Bro, but uh
yeah, Lenny Bro. Yeah, I had one lesson with Lenny Bro.
oh
I wish it was
wow.
more. Yeah.
Maybe you can talk about that.
Well, you know, Paul LaRose was a teacher of mine that, unfortunately, is not here any longer. But he was, looking back, my ultimate teacher. Like the best teacher I could have had. He went to school in Miami with Matheny and Jocko for a while, as long as they were in school. And so he was coming out of that kind of open, semi-ECM, yet standard jazz also kind of school. And so Lenny was going through a lot of problems. I studied with him once before he died, like really close to his death. He was staying with Paul, and Paul was generous enough to give Lenny, well, not only a place to stay, but also his students. So all of us got a chance to study with them a little bit. And then that whole fiasco went down, or whatever it was that happened with him drowning in the pool. But my friend had a bunch of tapes of him because he studied with them a lot, and he would lend them to me. And so I would cop the stuff off the tape too. And
Right.
so I was much more into finger style back then, because Lenny played a lot of right hand stuff. So my lesson was basically the idea of, I mean, this is probably his lesson 101 for everybody, but the idea of playing, comping for yourself and playing sort of with these two fingers, and playing the third and seventh with this. He kind of demonstrated on the blues. And so he would do that kind of thing, and, trying to get to and then sometimes trying to be like a piano player, pianistically. So that was the good thing about that lesson was it was a very, it opened me up to the idea that you can separate the guitar, even though it's only this thick, you can actually separate, where the piano is this wide, right? You can actually separate the bottom from the top. So it's a good kernel of information that stuck into me. And that, again, I was very young then. And then he also taught me the harmonics, those harmonics that he does with the full chords, that kind of thing, and how he kind of does it with his pinky and his thumb.
That's how I do it too. Yeah.
Yeah, his pinky and his thumb. That's something I never got in. I mean, I love it. I also studied with Ted Green, and he was into that too. For some reason I didn't get into that harmonic thing, but it's beautiful, man.
Yeah, it's I don't maybe do it as much anymore, and I kind of found myself, as I moved to New York, playing less and less like that, and more, for lack of better words, straight ahead, I guess.
Lack of better word.
Yeah. Not that that's can't be straight ahead, but I mean, and I can still do it, but it's just, I feel a little bit rusty at it, where you're comping for yourself like that.
Oh yeah, that whole thing. You're talking about that. Okay, I thought you were talking about the harmonics. Yeah.
Well, that's part of it too. Yeah. Because I mean, I used to solo with that, and I don't think I probably feel very comfortable if I tried to do that now,
I know what you mean. Yeah, the comping for yourself, I find that more and more important. For a long time, my influences were Schofield and Matheny, his music, and Frizzell. But with the first two, they don't do much of that.
Right.
I think Schofield also evolved more into that, but Matheny, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember him really ever comping for himself. It's like he plays single like a horn, or piano, or not a piano, but like a horn player, and it's not a thing of separation, mentally maybe, but not physically on the guitar. So as I leaned towards other players after that, it's sort of specifically piano players, I realized there's more of this Lenny Barreau kind of idea I can apply with myself. And the only thing I don't, the reason, I mean, I think the reason I stayed away from it for a while, the comping, but because I found that a lot of people who do that, they tend to break up their solos. Like, in other words, you're hearing this line go by, and then suddenly you're hearing them comping as if they're comping for a piano, for a horn player. And to me, that breaks up, and it still happens all the time. It breaks up the flow of the line, the linear thing.
Well, I don't think anybody did it as good as Lenny, because he could sort of like give that illusion, like without breaking it up, like you say.
Well, exactly, but that's what I'm talking about. If you can get it to a point that, and this is what I've been it's been coming into me naturally to when I hear Keith and he does that, I just love that. So I need some of that in my playing. So, if you can do it so it's naturally within the line and you're not going off the line and starting to comp for yourself and then go back into the line and then comp,
Right.
it's more convincing for me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's where you have to be holding down the chord while you're playing the line, not just necessarily thinking one, then the next, then the other, then you're bouncing back and forth. Yeah.
Right. I mean, sometimes it can happen, but it's not only holding down the chord. Lenny did that for sure, but it's a timing thing.
Totally. Yeah.
It's not always holding down the chord. I know what you mean, because that makes sense.
To be more specific, though, what I mean is you have to kind of intersperse it with some of that. So you're hearing the layer of the line over top, and then as well as a chord jab here and there. And
right, exactly. Yeah. No, I thought you were talking about like sort of
that's not just the one way. Yeah.
Right. No, I thought you were talking about more like the Red Garland, where he plays the chord in the left hand all the time,
right,
and plays the right hand. That's sort of a stylistic thing that guitarists can latch onto a little easier,
right?
Because you keep that going, and then But I'm talking about like even comping with your pinky and your third finger while you got this going. That and it's that's hard, man.
Yeah,
that's the hardest part of the guitar for me. One of the hardest.
Yeah, you have to. I developed a lot of different exercises to get the wherewithal with my left hand to be able to do all that kind of stuff, or at least sort of come close to what Lenny was doing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, these are concepts that you can sort of build on forever.
Who do you think of is? We were talking about innovative people. Like, I mean, like you could go back, like you said, to Charlie Christian, Charlie Parker.
Oh yeah.
Maybe his name escapes me right now, but was big in the 50s and played on all the readers' polls a couple of times. Why can't I think of his name?
Barney Kessel or
Barney Kessel. Like he was kind of like one of the first people that kind of was starting to comp for himself. I would think, right?
He's great.
Yeah. And then
so many great players back then, man.
And then Lenny kind of took it another step further, Is there anybody in jazz right now that you can think of that's innovative?
Oh wow. You mean guitars?
Could be guitar. Well, you can start with that, or it could be any instrument.
Well, I mean, I don't listen to a ton of guitar players, I'll be honest. I mean, I teach, so I hear what they're listening to, and they kind of play sometimes like different players that I've heard, my students. But innovative, that word is very charged. It's a tough word, because that means a hell of a lot, right?
To different people too.
Yeah, of course. And if we start watering it down, as like it's the word genius, right? Everybody calls people geniuses. And back in the day, genius was really reserved for, like a certain kind of bar. I mean, I think like the guys I named, Schofield and Frizzell and Matheny, I feel like in Benson, I feel like they're really innovative. And from there, I feel like there have been there have been some people who have touched upon things, like Kurt Rosenwinkel. I really admire him. He's sort of taken what I would think is kind of a Holsworthian Matheny meld. He might disagree, but that's something of what I sense, at least sense. I'm not saying it's direct, but
yeah. My favorite period of his is probably, at least for me, peaked like maybe early 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, I don't follow I have never followed his career. I mean, he lives in New York, and I've seen him play a couple times. We've crossed paths, but with a lot of guitar players, I've seen them all play a few times, and that's sort of enough. I mean, it's great, but I don't want to be influenced by them. That's kind of the reason.
Yeah,
it's a weird, and that's what I'm talking about. Like,
no, I know what you
mean. My 18-year-old self wouldn't have thought this way.
I had to do the same thing. I had to stop listening to Matheny for a while, and then
exactly.
And then there was the kind of the same thing with Lauren Lofsky. I had to stop
Oh, wow,
listening
I
to
know.
him for a while.
Yeah, I know. We Lauren and I played about, oh my God, 20 years ago
Oh yeah, yeah.
in Canada. Yeah.
I took a few lessons with him too because
No, he's
I
great
lived
too. Yeah.
I lived in Toronto. And I actually interviewed him too on the channel.
Oh, beautiful. I'll have to check it out. But yeah, so anyways, innovation is there are a lot of great young players out here that it's kind of it kind of blows me away how people have gotten their stuff together so young, you know. And there's certainly names I could name, but innovators, that's we'll have to see. That's the one thing I don't like about jazz is the industry is that it's sort of like if you're above 35, they think 35 and younger is the time that you should be shining.
Right.
But progress doesn't work like that. It's
Especially in jazz.
well, yeah,
Yeah.
especially in jazz,
Yeah.
especially in 2023. I mean,
Right.
it's we've had so much innovation in jazz, and like to expect people to be a 23-year-old, Keith Jarrett or Herbie Hancock or McCoy, and play like those guys play when they're 23 or 24. That's the expectation now. If you're that young and you're already playing, wow, let's get this guy some record deals. Let's get, but many people are left in the dust who are actually innovating, because they've hit their 40s and 50s, and that's the time they're shining. So, I feel like, there should be more of a light on people who are doing things later on in life, and the people who have actually continued to do it
Yeah.
and progressing and putting out records, and trying out different things, because you don't stop learning at 25
No.
or 30 or whatever. I mean,
Not if you're really into it anyway.
exactly. There's concepts that that I'm working on that I'd never touched upon when I was even in my 40s, and it's like,
Right.
wow, it's hopefully I'm growing. I can't, it's hard to be objective, but
Well, speaking of growing, and in a way, it's in the sort of lineage of innovating, but just as a self-reflection, like how much you've changed or grown. At least with me, I know that my playing has changed from moving to New York. Did you notice something similar too? Because you're being
oh yeah,
influenced. You can go out and see so many great players all the time.
yeah, definitely. Now the weird thing is when we were, we moved to New York, we were younger, and what's happening now is the people all over the world kind of have New York in their computers, in a sense. It's not quite the same, obviously, I know,
It's like a
but
magnet, right? We're just
yeah,
drawing
we didn't
people.
have, YouTube and all this, and like they can see Smalls live, they can see, you know, all these live videos of people playing. I mean, it's endless. You can't
Right.
possibly get through them all in one life. So we didn't have that. So in a sense, we're lucky we were in New York to see that. But the kids these days, I don't think everybody has to move to New York any longer, unless they have that opportunity. Yeah, of course, do it. But
If they like
don't feel.
hauling gear around on the subway, go for it.
Yeah, there you go. That too.
Yeah.
But they shouldn't feel bad that, oh man, I have to move to New York. I mean, but I can't afford it,
Right.
because it's really, the cost of living is crazy.
Mhm.
But they have other things that we didn't have. So you have to think in terms of what you do have, and that's why there's so many great young players now, because YouTube is just really galvanizing a lot of young folks.
Do you think I hear this a lot? Do you think that in the younger players coming out, doesn't matter what instrument, that they have a lot more facility uh, than sort of we did at that age, but maybe have some less substance to it and less ability to tell a story or anything like that? Because I hear a lot of people talking about that, and I just want to get your opinion on that,
Yeah,
especially
that's
when
a great.
you're in the trenches, you're teaching.
No, absolutely. No,
Yeah.
you're 100% right. You hear about that a lot, and I think it's totally true, because it's like a sport, but yet it's not like a sport, right? I mean, you do have to train hard and everything, but there's personality. You know, in a sport, you can win and not have personality. You know,
Right.
a boxer can win if they want, and they can just be like, "Oh, that was great, bye." You know, they don't have to have the personality to. But here, you have to have character in playing. So it's not about just getting all the stuff together, but it's finding a character, personality, and what's beyond and behind the notes, and not even beyond that. That's kind of like, you know, but what's behind the notes? You know, like, I mean, who is behind the notes? You know, and that takes, I mean, that's a lot of self, you know,
In reflection, introspection.
exactly,
Yeah.
self, yeah, exactly, reflection, solitude, you know, all that stuff, and that, you know, comes with time. And this is again back to what I'm saying, is like there's different in jazz, there's different peaks for different players. You know, in sports, they're not. You have to, you know, you have to be great before you're 30 years old or something like that, right?
Right.
Or 35, because or else it's you're not going to last on the field or whatever it is. But you know, jazz, you know, the media in jazz, you know, fans sometimes think like the same as if this is a sport, and that's we have to sort of uncouch that. That's not a great way to think. That's not the way the music's going to last,
Yeah. The
because you're not.
only way it's a sport that I think of is, like you said, the training of fine muscle movement rather than the big muscles that you use in sports. You're
Yeah, yeah,
training the fine muscles to do what you want.
yeah, and
Yeah.
you know, it's just getting the tools together is what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. Is like,
Yeah.
you know, it's not necessarily physical, but that too. But
Yeah.
it's a matter of like really just having all your, you know, T's crossed and your I's, you know, dotted, and just really know how to play through changes, voice leading, all
Mm,
that stuff, tone, rhythm. I mean, there's so much to talk about there, but once you get past that, what else is left?
right.
That's where the real stuff is at this point. You
Hmm.
know, maybe back in the day it was a little different, but now it's like everybody can play. It seems like. So get past all that stuff, and then, you know, figure out what's left, and then what's left is really within. You know,
Yeah. It seems
that's the
like the
key.
way, if if I can even say this, the way the cream rises to the top is a different way than maybe than we grew up, or even the generations
Exactly.
before us. Um,
Exactly. Yeah, that's it, for sure.
how
But you know, this whole storytelling thing is I feel that's quite missing. And you know, I will mention a book that I wrote a few years ago.
Oh, cool.
It's on Hal Leonard, and that's from my, you know, studies or lack thereof in Indian music. I mean, I've you know, I've studied a certain amount in Indian classical music and been around a lot of people, but I sort of mirror in this book. I sort of mirror that and reflect upon how some of the ideas from Indian classical music have influenced the idea in jazz and the idea of telling a story. So that's a fun book to have. I think, you know,
Okay. Well,
it's on Hal Leonard.
send me the link and I'll put it in the video description.
Oh, sure, yeah, it's on
Yeah.
Amazon. It's very cheap.
Cool.
But
Is that awesome segue? Because I was gonna just ask you, how much has East Asian rhythms influenced your playing and compositions?
well, they certainly have. You know, the one thing is, you know, I'm not one of these scholars of East Asian music, and people, since I'm from there and I've played with people from there, they you know, think I'm like a total expert or at that, but I'll humbly say I'm not. Um,
Because
but
that takes a whole lifetime of study
well,
just onto itself. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And even if I put more hours into it, I still feel like I wouldn't have penetrated it even close to where I want to be
Mhm.
at. You know, so I've sort of taken a different direction with this. I mean, I've played with a lot of Indian and Pakistani musicians. My wife's an Indian singer, and so we do a lot of stuff. You know, we sit on the couch and, you know, I harmonize her compositions, and that way I have to learn her melodies and all those intricacies, let's say. She's a modern Indian singer. She's not a classical Indian singer, but her studies are in that. But so the idea is, I've done this by nurture, hearing things and feeling them. Uh, and I have studied with a couple of Indian classical musicians, but I didn't like. I'm not an expert on raga, for instance,
Right.
or an expert on conical, which is South Indian rhythms or even North Indian rhythms, Hindustani. But I have enough to fortify my creativity towards my compositions, my music, my playing, and that just grows.
Right.
As, as I listen more and as I do my own self-studying. But I don't have a guru kind of teacher
Right.
and all that. I didn't study the sitar.
Well, how I know it's hard to describe, but how maybe is there any way you could talk about how you might integrate some of that stuff? I mean, right now I'm sure it's more natural. It's not like I'm going to sit down and I'm going to try and incorporate necessarily something unless you're trying to come up with exercises or something like that when you're practicing maybe, but
Right. Well, I mean, it's both actually. It's as natural as I can make it for sure, because that's to me that's where I sit. Right. I don't want to
right.
do something out here and I'm over here, because then it sound you can hear that.
Right.
Now, there was a sort of an exercise, if you will, from South India, um, which was a sort of um, taking rhythms and accentuating them so they're longer rhythms, and they also shorten as well. So it's like if I did write a schematic of that. I'm trying to think about this. It was a while ago, but it was like, let's say, a 2/4 bar, or like a 2/8 to a 3/8 to a 4/8 to 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, and then backwards. So it expands and contracts. And you hear that in the music, especially when they do it. But so I wrote out that schematic and I came up with a really wonderful tune, a really cool melody it's very jazz oriented, not bebop, but
Yeah.
very, you can tell it's not Indian. Um, but within that framework, I was able to sort of catch that expansion contraction kind of feel. That tune is called Thin King.
Okay.
It's
I'll have
like
to check that out.
it's
That
thinking but Thin King. Kind of
nice.
fun.
Yeah. So it's like almost using a different kind of form than what you were used to thinking, like a form from classical music or something like it,
Yeah,
an
Sedal Allegro.
AABA form or with sonata form or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah,
Cool.
totally. Yeah, or in fact, not even classical music, but jazz. I
Yeah.
mean, AABA. It's most of the standards and tunes that we do are like that. They're rarely through composed. So this was a through composed melody when I started, but then of course I wanted to repeat it, so it's not really through composed. So, but it definitely that's an example of how things will open up, your norm, so to speak, your default place.
Right.
When you put something in the front, and you have to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And the book talks about that too. My book talks about raga construction and how we can use it as jazz musicians, which is something I can work on for a lifetime. But if I was 25 years old and I saw that, I might start then. It
Yeah.
might be.
Partly from my Lenny Bro influence of because he was very into flamenco playing.
Oh yeah, I know.
I kind of dipped my toe into that a little bit, and I wrote a song called Jazenko,
Yeah.
oddly enough, which is like a mix of flamenco compas and then did it in a sort of jazz way. It turned
Yeah,
out turned out nice. I
if you
think.
put some Django in, you could have called it Jang and
Janko,
yeah,
jazz
Anko.
jazz Django.
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, no, that's it's good. It's good to get influence from other places.
Yeah,
It's as long as you show the respect to it, or you're sincere about it, and you're not doing it just to, whatever,
Yeah.
get through. I think it's okay, because it's all music, and only God owns music. No one truly owns music. And
Yeah.
that's not a religious God. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
oh, I'm just being the
The-
universe, you know, if we're all the same,
if
who
you just
actually
get a
owns.
small taste of it, I feel fortunate.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as the owner of the music gets paid their dues, that's
Right.
that's a different thing.
From borrowing it from the universe.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I saw some footage of concert footage from WNYC, and man, the sound of the recording was really good. And I love the tabla player too, because even though
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
even though he was like, it sounded like he was kind of the same as you. He wasn't trying to be strict in that format. It almost like he was playing the tablas like a jazz drummer in a way.
Well, he's a jazz drummer, Samir
Cool.
Gupta. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Uh, he's a jazz drummer and a tabla player. There's a few of those guys. Dan Weiss is someone I played with for years. He's on a bunch of my records. He's absolutely a heavy drummer, but he's very also a great student of tabla. And so, I seek those kind of people that are kind of like me. I mean, these guys are a little bit more serious about the Indian music aspect than I am. Um, or I wouldn't call it serious, but they've delved into it longer. They have the tabla, they play the tabla.
Mhm.
I can't play the sitar. That's just like, but that it's interesting, because I do have a new record coming out.
Okay.
It's a 16th record of mine, and it's a collaboration with a sitar player. So it
Nice.
just reminded me of that. And uh, there's drums and cello, but it's the sitar player that's his name is Josh Feinberg, white Jewish American guy, and he's another one of those guys that thoroughly has studied Indian music, and he continues to for the last 20 years. But he's also a jazz bass player who's taken lessons with Dave Holland and Paul Bley, and so this record's really interesting. Please watch out for that. That's
Okay.
coming out in May.
Do you have a name for that yet?
Well, the name of the band is Nayabaaz, Nayabaz, but it will be under my name and his name. And
Okay.
the name of the record is called Charm.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
it's really different.
and as a side note, from this interview or whatever, how much time do you have left? to, did you need to go anywhere? Or I just want to be respectful of your time and
Oh,
all
no,
that
no,
stuff.
that's good. No, we can do it a little longer.
Sure,
I
sure.
mean, you're fun to
Okay.
talk to.
Are you? Would you be able to demonstrate any kind of rhythm, the like approach, maybe that any viewer or listener maybe might be able to take away, like just something to start?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a rhythmical approach. You mean on the guitar?
It could be, or just clapping and counting, or
Well,
anything like that.
yeah. I mean,
Like
one of the tunes.
like if
Oh,
you're
yeah,
superimposing something over a 4/4 type of thing, maybe.
yeah. Okay. Well, here's what they call a T-high, and a T-high is a three-time repeated rhythm. And usually the first one is sort of a feeling of on the beat, and second one is syncopated, so it feels like it's on an upbeat.
Okay.
And this is just a vague version. I mean, this is not the rules that I'm saying aren't cemented. I mean, there's probably many T-highs that don't do that, but the ones I've learned, and I have a tune called Snake Charmer, which I man, that's an old record. Uh, Came out in 90. We did it. Sorry, in 2020. No, sorry, 2003. I
Okay.
have to get that right. And that's Dan Weiss and Gary Versace on there,
Okay.
and Dave Liebman, and he's on a couple of cuts, and my wife's on a couple of cuts, Kieran Oluwalia. And so basically, Snake Charmer, I harmonized this one pattern. Dun, 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 dun. Now, what happens with the T-high, I'll explain. it has the one rule it does have to follow. It has to land on a one, right? So it can't, if it's a pattern that's exactly repeated. You don't sway away from that pattern, and it has to eventually land on the one. So it's very mathematical. It's not just any old thing that lands on the one. It's very mathematical. If you try and make up one yourself, you'll realize how difficult it actually is. But once you get the hang of it, so if this pattern is 2, 3, 4, ba, da, 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 da. So those are 3 patterns of the same. Ba, da, 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 da. 2 bars of 4, right?
Yeah.
So that's the T high basically. Now, they have something that they actually do the T high 3 times in a row. So if you did that, it elongates the T high, and it's kind of interesting. And I did that with some harmony. So it would be like dun 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 dun. So what I did there is I did the 3 pattern T high 3 times.
Yep.
But I didn't land on the downbeat the first 2 times. And that and the reason why is because it elongates the cycle.
Okay.
Dun 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 dun. That's where it's full blown. But if I wanted to extend that, I wouldn't land on it. So dun 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 dun.
Cool.
That's it. Yeah. So that's a basic very little explanation.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Just something simple, and then you can I would imagine you could make each one of those phrases as complicated as you wanted to, right? No.
Oh, yeah. There's I mean, that's one with triplets in between, but there's some really amazing ones. I played in a band called Indo Coalition with Rudresh Mahanthappa, a great saxophone player, and Dan was in that band playing tabla and drum set, and it was a hybrid set. It's kind of crazy, and there was no bass player. So for years we played a lot of music, and Dan would have these solos, and we would always have to ask him, okay, which T high are you going to do? Because to get on the one on the melody, none of us could be off, or it's a disaster, right? So he would come up with one, and some of those were really, he studies it really deeply. So some of those would be really incredible, and then we'd come on the downbeat, like, because we knew ahead of time. I mean, sometimes you can hear it. Often you can hear it as he's doing it. But
maybe if you're used to hearing it, but it probably would mess me up.
It messes a lot of people up, actually, in the beginning. You have to. I've been listening to Indian classical music for so many years now, 30, 35 years, that every time a T high comes up, I'm just like, my ears are perking, like, okay. It's like listening to Jack DeJohnette trade with Keith, Keith and Gary, it's like, that's almost some of the most exciting stuff in the whole thing. It's like, okay, when he starts going off and trading, boom, where's that downbeat,
Right. And it's like, how did he feel where one was? Sometimes, right?
Well, sometimes, yeah. I don't think any of them really, it's absolutely true that
it's almost more like on cue, like, I'm going to cue you. Let's make one here now.
Yeah. Well, I asked Gary Peacock, like, I was with him once, and I asked him, like, what do you count? Because I was young too. I was like, do you count, man? He's like, he started laughing. Because, man, if I counted what Jack's doing, I would be off all the time.
Yeah.
So it's more of a intuitive kind of feel, but they are off sometimes. So
it makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
How would you, or maybe you can talk a little bit about how you develop your unique vocabulary, because it's a mix of all this stuff that you're talking about. And I'm pretty sure I've noticed a lot of major 7 sharp 5 chords in there too.
Yeah, well, I do.
At least some of the stuff that I listened to. I didn't.
You're talking about like the composition.
Yeah.
Well, that's a beautiful chord, And
yeah, totally.
And there's different voicings of it. Let me just break out my guitar. I haven't really played much. I will see if I can demonstrate something here. Yeah. So, a little uncomfortable here. Um, yeah, I mean, so the vocabulary thing, I mean, I know this is not a lesson, but
Yeah,
one of the things in my book, one of the
cool.
things that I talk about is what I've learned from ragas. And of course, I'm not going to play ragas because that's a whole other thing, right? But why not see what I can bring to jazz through that lineage, you know? And you know, so what I do is try and form the most basic concepts I can, and you know, the simplistic things that I can take from places, and then, you know, make them into larger ideas. So what I learned, you know, as compared to how we learn in the West, um,
Yeah,
one
this
of
is
the
already. I like how you set this up. How we
yeah
learn in
yeah
the West. I
yeah
love how
yeah
you're setting this up already. This I'm
yeah
digging this.
well
Okay.
yeah for sure, because I learned in the West,
Yeah.
and I know what it takes.
Yeah, you know
To,
both sides of the coin, sort of thing.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, and I haven't come close to the other side of the coin yet. So and I keep saying that because I haven't. I don't want anybody to think I'm, you know. But one of the things is the way the raga. There's certain magnetism within certain notes, right? It's a little bit like the modes. Like we have, you know, Lydian mode, and we know the sharp four is the prominent character note, right? So we bring that out. So it is similar in that sense. But with ragas, there could be 10 or many different scales, many different notes that are used within the scale, but only one raga. Like in other words, you can have this is a
And
good
then if you
example.
had to describe what a raga meant in a really brief way to people that don't know,
Yeah.
you have to play a certain series of notes, right, in a certain order. From my very, very limited knowledge.
What that's a basic thing, but a raga is a way of expressing a certain kind of mood,
Right.
certain kind of
Okay.
emotion. Now, if you're gonna play, you know, let's just say a Lydian, you know, G Lydian.
Hmm.
If you're gonna play, oh my hands, yeah, if you're gonna play all these notes,
Yeah, and your guitar is actually getting cut out too.
is it cutting off?
Yeah, I think maybe it's the zoom. Because do you have it set to? There
How
you
about
go.
now?
Perfect.
All right, so in other words, if you're gonna play like a G Lydian like this, you know, let's say we do that. So that's the way I learned to play G Lydian, right? Like, you know, you play all the notes, you get through it, and you move it around a little bit. Now, if you were taking an example of a raga, what you would do is there would be sort of some rules, if you will, that limit your motion and to those rules. So they magnify certain notes. Like let's say the Lydian, we would actually magnify the sharp four, obviously, right? Right. But the thing
And I
is,
hate to stop you
yeah,
again,
yeah,
but I
go ahead.
think your microphone is tapping up against the guitar, and it's
Oh, now it's okay. No, please
yeah,
stop me because I don't do this very often.
yeah, no worries.
Is it cool now, you think?
It's a
See, I
little
got
bit
it.
better, yeah. It's just it was making a tick 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 every time the
Uh,
mic was bouncing. Yeah.
how about now?
Way, way, way better, yeah.
Okay, cool. So, so if you got a sharp four, now a raga would mean that you approach that sharp four in a certain way. See, so we don't learn in the West that you approach anything a certain way, right? We just say, okay, there's a sharp four, you know. We can play all we want around that, but if it was sort of in their mentality, it would be more like, and this is I'm making up, obviously. It would be more of a thing that is like, okay, let's say you have to go
Approach
to
it
the
from
fifth.
above.
Yeah, you have to approach it from above. So now you get this little inflection in there that is actually an emotion, right? It's a
Right.
vibe, right? And so that's just the most basic. Now, if you times that by like four other things, then you really can imagine. You know, you can have the same notes with 20 different ragas or endless amount really. You know, it could be the G Lydian, let's say, you know, in the
Mm-hmm.
Western, but those could be like, there could be endless amounts of ragas within that G Lydian. And that's, you know, that's a kind of message of translation the way I put it.
Right.
And so that's kind of something I said in my book is if you want to bring out more character in your modes, so to speak, in your scale playing, your arpeggios playing, start giving yourself these, making up your own little rules, these little ragas. Even if for one tune do this, for another tune do that. So it's not always that when you see a G Lydian that you're always playing. You're playing the same kind of stuff.
Right.
You know, you're actually like you're actually like making up some rule that and it becomes sort of this more character building.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
so that's
that's
kind of
great. Awesome. I dig it.
yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like, I mean, I can use more hours of practicing in that myself. That's something I just came up with, but I don't have it mastered yet. You know?
Yeah. With me, it's always how do I approach that chord tone or that sound in a more like bebop way, like enclosures and stuff like that. Coming up with, I guess it's sort of similar, but just a different angle.
Yeah, I mean, there's similarities because it's music, but
Right.
there's, within constraints, you'll find more possibilities, if you will. You know that
Yep.
whole saying. I mean,
Yep.
when you put
Consum-
constraints on people, they have to like break out of it somehow. And this is kind of what I'm. If it's just a free for all the time, then it can become monotonous.
Yep.
And this kind of helps you sort of pinpoint some more accurate ideas.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
This is a bit of an open-ended question, but on purpose.
Yeah,
How
yeah, sure.
much does theory inform your playing and compositions?
Yeah, that is a big question. Well, here's the way I see it. I like to be as intuitive as possible, but I also realize that intuition is developed through preparation. In terms of this, in terms of art, at least. So it's not like I can just rely on my intuition if I never worked on certain things. So they kind of go hand in hand. And yes, absolutely, you work on theory and you work on all kinds of things, new things all the time. And then you sort of, like Charlie Parker said, learn your instrument and let it go, something
Right.
like that. You know,
Get on the
and,
bandstand and wail.
yeah, and you can be critical. You can listen to a recording of yourself and keep growing by critiquing yourself, but try and do that off the bandstand.
Right. And if
you
you
know.
want to, unless you're going to play anymore, you can revert back to the other sound if you want. Like, did you turn
Oh,
the original sound on? Is that because I'm hearing an echo?
oh, wow. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's
Yeah, there we go.
so weird, man. Zoom.
Technology, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I think
Um.
I can't hear any of that stuff.
Yeah. Oh, on my end, yeah, I am. So I don't know if it's going to pick it up. That's why I mentioned it.
Oh, okay.
And I'm just trying to make the experience as painless as possible for anybody
Yeah,
that's
no,
listening.
totally, man.
That's cool. I like that answer. That's we're kind of in the same headspace. Like for me, I like to know enough of theory to make sense of stuff, but again, not think about it so much. At least not when I'm improvising, not on the fly. Thinking
Yeah,
is
no, no, for sure. But I mean, also compositionally, like when
yeah.
you're composing,
Yeah, then
you
it
know,
comes a little in more handy, yeah.
it comes in more handy. But again, it's like I don't want I don't want my music to sound like I thought about it.
Right.
Like I mean, you hear music out there, that sometimes you think, I feel like I can hear the guy or the girl or the woman composing the music, you know?
Thinking really hard about it. Yeah.
Yeah, you can hear that in the music. And it's like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it's so, you know, definitely learn as much as you can, but just let it through, you know, let the intuition flow.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, because I had the same idea, was the live score you did to the silent film. That
Oh,
was an
wow.
idea that I had about maybe 5 years ago to do something like that.
That's amazing. Yeah. Um, well, that's a whole other thing. The guitar, New York Guitar Festival asked me to do that. Uh, and of course I said yes. I thought, wow, you know, and you know, it was this one film that he really loved, this Indian film that I guess it could have been Charlie Chaplin or anybody, but it was
Right.
this Indian film, and probably thought about me because of it. But it's from 1928, and it's a black and white film, and it was it was all engrossing that year. Like I just that's all I kind of did. I composed for that, um, you know, and it was a great experience. Hopefully, we'll still play it live, but it's on record. You can hear it streaming
Okay.
and all that stuff. But
Maybe you
it
can, if
was
you can send me some links or something, I'd like to
oh,
check it out. Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. No, it was really, oh man, what an experience to see the characters on stage, and I mean on the film, and to be able to play something that doesn't get in their way but enhances maybe what they're thinking within the plot. It's like all my, you know, all
Right.
my cells were just like, you know, open to to interpretation, in interpreting their feelings and how I want to imply my music on top of that. Oh, such a delicate balance, man.
Yeah, and to stay locked in with the video itself, I imagine is hard.
Yeah, we practiced very hard. That's why I don't take it on the road, because too much.
Yeah,
You know,
that's
I
well.
don't I don't
That
do one-offs.
that was going
It's
to be
too,
my idea, is that I would maybe try to tour it around to like different theaters and do this live.
if you can get a few gigs, you know, in a row, that's great. But if like I've been offered one-offs, and I just I don't say yes, because it's
All the
such a
money goes into rehearsing.
yeah, it's an ordeal. Like I mean,
Yeah.
I would have to look. I had it all memorized too. I didn't look at my score at all. Hour and 15 minutes
Well,
of
you'd
music,
almost have to, because you'd have to know your part so well that you're actually conducting everybody else while you're playing.
pretty
I'm
much.
sure, like at least
That's a lot of
a
that, a
part
lot of
of
that,
it. Yeah.
and I'm also using acoustic guitar, electric guitar, and electric sitar. So I'm constantly like moving guitars around, and it's kind of a pain actually, but
So you
it's
paid
work.
yourself triple scale, of course.
Oh yeah, of course. No, the pay was great. We did it, I think, twice or three times so far.
Hmm.
Um, but you know, it's the kind of thing. It's not a jazz group. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like you really need to rehearse a lot and get out there. So
So that you really did put yourself in the film composer sort of mentality.
yeah, I mean, I've always thought of myself as a composer from the beginning. You know, even when I improvise, it's you know, I don't want to improvise, you know, ideas that I constantly do over and over again. I just get really kind of uptight about that, and that's inevitable. Let me just say that you will play your own stuff always over and
Hmm.
over again, but to what degree is what I'm talking about.
Right.
You know, it's like I don't, I really don't get off on licks per se.
Yeah.
You know, I get off on telling a story like Jim Hall. If you hear Jim Hall, he has his sort of ideas that you do hear once in a while come up, but you know, it always sounds fresh. I mean, some of us like Schofield's like that too.
Yeah.
He's got his total vocabulary. You can tell. Oh yeah, that's. I've heard him play that 10 times, but somehow he just sounds like he's really in the moment, and I think he is in the moment. That's why.
Yeah. Where all the
He,
cylinders are firing, so to speak, and it's just coming out. Yeah.
yeah, he's not
Well,
attached to necessarily the outcome.
right. Right. Now there was something that popped into my head that inspired from what you just said, and now I lost the thought.
Oh, I mean, you're saying compositions and like how composing affects your playing or something, or
Geez, I don't know. The problem
yeah.
is that it's hard to do an interview because I'm trying to listen to what you're saying, and then I have these other ideas popping in, and I'm like, oh, I'll try to remember that to ask, and then sometimes they just vanish on me.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, we're, covering a lot, but I mean,
Yeah,
I'll just I'll just say, I mean, the idea of composition has always been part, and I think that's, we talked about that a little bit. Like I jumped on your
right.
video, and you were talking about what's missing these days, or how's jazz gonna
Yep.
keep going. Of course, it's going to keep going, but to what degree? I think one of the ideas behind the comment I made, which was about composition, is not that many people are focused. It doesn't seem like it's like a secondary thing. Like I'm going to compose and improvise. Oh, I mean, I'm going to play and improvise.
I'm
Oh,
gonna
I
I'm gonna
need to compose.
compose something as a vehicle so I can improvise over.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
That too. That too. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So my favorite players. I mean, if you take history and you think of all the players back when pre-70s, everybody was a composer. I really can't. I mean, I'm sure there's a few that weren't, but I mean, just about everybody who was maybe not a bassist or a drummer, but everybody who played like piano, saxophone, trumpet, guitar. It almost seems like everybody composed, and some bassists and drummers. But
well, I think it informs your improvisations
well,
when you
for
compose.
sure, and,
I mean,
and vice versa.
yeah,
Yeah, there's no doubt. But uh, you name anybody, and they have, how many hit tunes there are that from everybody. I mean, like Joe Henderson, Sonny Rollins. I mean, they all like have these unbelievable tunes
right.
that are just etched in the icon of jazz history, and everybody plays them. And of course, Monk and Wayne Shorter, and the obvious choices there too.
Yeah,
But man, I mean, you just name Andrew Hill. I mean, he has some amazing compositions, and yet he's like a very unique player. Keith Jarrett, unbelievable player, but really singular compositions. I mean, the untouchable. Like I haven't heard that those
it's
compositions by anybody
with
actually.
Keith Jarrett. It's to me, it's like if I could get to like 3% of the freedom that he has doing whatever he wants, I'd be happy.
Well, that's my been my goal for years, is
Right.
to have that freedom, not to obviously sound like anybody, but just to have that freedom. And it comes down to the paradigm, like, why are you playing? You have to ask that. I try to ask myself that before every situation. Is it to sound great, which is an egotistical thing,
Right.
which is hard because we want to sound great, or is it just to play great music and have the music teach us something, and teach
And
us how to downplay the ego, basically.
and maybe affect other people in a positive way. That's how I like to think of it.
That too, yeah.
Yeah.
But the reason why I don't necessarily say that is because I don't have no control over that.
Right. Yeah.
Like everybody has control over somewhat, if you will, if free will exists. But
Hmm.
most people have some kind of control over how they feel about music, and that's up to them.
Without getting all philosophical about it.
Yeah, well,
Right.
it's impossible to actually.
Well, maybe just a couple more things here and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
How much teaching do you do? Is it only at New School, or do you have some private students as well?
Well, some students come in from Europe, and they want to do like 2 lessons or something. That happens. That was happening even more frequently, but not in the last couple of years because of, I guess, the pandemic kind of,
Right.
you know. But the New School, it really depends. Sometimes I have 5 students in an ensemble, and then sometimes, like this semester, I was going to go on the road, and I've been doing some other stuff, so I asked for less. So it really depends. And the students they're all different levels. It's
Yeah.
really kind of amazing.
Yeah.
You know.
Cool.
One guy's from China and he's playing all free music, and I have to deal with that. I have to like say, okay, that's great, and let's try this with the free music, free guitar, whatever. But let's listen to Blues for Alice.
Yeah, even Ornette Coleman, like, studied people who played. You know what I'm saying. Like, I'm not
tonally
being very eloquent about it, but
no, they play tonal. You're saying like tonally and really like inside.
Right.
Oh, he played. I heard he played a lot of Bird on his horn.
Yeah, well, you can hear it in his playing. Yeah.
Totally.
One of the thing that I wanted to ask you was if you want to get into this and to what extent is if there's been any backlash in the jazz world with your approach and style, because I know it's a pretty conservative thing. You know what I mean?
You mean the jazz world?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the jazz world can be conservative, but no, I think there's plenty of room. I mean, you can ask that question to so many people. I mean, look at Frizzell.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, he's one of my ultimate heroes. You know, I mean, like we're back to Keith Jarrett. I mean, you know, he plays like sometimes Cecil Taylor-ish. You know, I mean the way. I mean, it's Keith, but you know, I don't care about what anybody says. If I'm not going for what I need to go for, I mean, who cares?
Good. Well, I like that. I like your response.
What? It's the only response I can think of. I mean,
awesome.
Why would I do this and project myself towards this person? The next thing I'm going to project myself towards this person. That's why I don't really think about audiences either, because like I can't read their mind. So you know, it's like if they're a fan, I know they like what I do. That's all there is.
And there's no sense in building up some animosity in your head about things for no reason if you don't get some kind of positive response at some point. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely gotten some great media attention, and then I've gotten some not so great media attention. And I have to, at one point in my life, I was like, oh man, how could they not hear this? But I've kind of passed that level, and I realized there's some people who just don't like overdrive on guitar, for instance,
right.
And I only do that sometimes now, but there's certain records that I had more of that on because the influences I've had from the past,
maybe like Sko even.
Yes, I mean Sko, he doesn't like kill it, but with overdrive, but like Frizzell, had a bunch of records that he put on this overdrive, and I loved it, man. I just jazz doesn't have to be a clean sound.
Right. Yeah. Especially if you're going to go, especially if you're like Sko, at least he said in the past, where he's like trying to get more like a saxophone sound.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would love to hear, this might be funny, but I'd love to hear Benson with an overdrive sound. just to see what happens.
Right.
It might sound like crap, but I mean, in other words, that's the paradigm I'm talking about, being open.
Well, especially if you're not used to playing with overdrive, you have to change your technique a little bit to make it work, probably.
Yeah, but it would be really interesting to hear someone like that.
I don't think it would take them long to figure it out.
No, he might not even have to do anything.
Right. Maybe.
But that's not what he hears, and but with the overdrive, I'm also always looking for. I'm always looking for sounds that sound like more like baritone and tenor saxophone, like like a throaty and stuff. Not necessarily the Holsworth thing anymore, which is really amazing and smooth, like killing overdrive. That's my preference, but so many people do that. It's kind of hard to get away from the influences when you have that kind of tone. Yeah,
and you can definitely hear Eddie's take on Holdsworth in his playing, especially later on.
Oh yeah. Oh man, he was that was one of his biggest influences.
Yeah.
Holdsworth he was on a different planet, no doubt about it.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. I was listening to an interview where it was Alex and Eddie being interviewed, and
Yeah.
and Alex was like ribbing him about like listening to the just jazz guy Alan Holdsworth, but he was like doing it all tongue in cheek, like making fun of him. I thought
Yeah,
that
exactly.
was fun. Brotherly ribbing or whatever.
Yeah, it's that was fun. I would recommend watching the Smithsonian interview of Eddie.
Yeah,
I
I've
think
seen that. Yeah,
oh man, it's so deep. How many things he's done? It's like, oh God, you did that too? I forgot about that. Put the pickup in the wax. I mean, he
yeah.
invented that. Oh my God,
There's a reason why
you
him
still
and
do
Les
that.
Paul got along so well, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's like Les Paul, and like, oh, it's really, yeah. But
Well,
these are the kind of people that you just there's potential when you see those. That keeps us going.
yeah, I agree. Well, Rez,
Yeah,
thank you so much for taking part of this.
absolutely, Adam, and hopefully we'll see you on the streets.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I haven't been playing out much the last few years or whatever. I end up getting surgery on my shoulder,
Oh wow.
and then I had a torn rotator cuff. I fell down the stairs with a guitar on my back and just
Dude.
wrenched my arm backwards. The doctor said in the X-rays and stuff that there was just like a thread of the tendon hanging onto the bone, so they had to like put it back on. And I couldn't play out or anything like that. I could play guitar after like maybe 6 weeks or so, a little bit, but I couldn't gig or anything like that. Right when he gave me the go ahead to start playing, that's when the pandemic hit. And
Oh
then
God.
and I haven't really played out much since for
But
other
still,
various reasons. Yeah.
no one played out for about a year and a half. So,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
that was good timing for you. You can hang out and
Right.
do what everybody else is doing.
I put all my energy into the YouTube channel at that time.
Oh, that's great, man.
Yeah.
Well, good luck with it, man. I hope it does well. I see
Thank
some
you.
great.
Thanks.
Hopefully, we'll just
Well,
expand.
before you go, do you have anything else that you want to plug?
Well, no, there's just I mean, this new record of mine that's coming out. It's a collaboration actually, called Charm. That should be coming out in May, and
That's right around the corner, so that's good.
yeah, and my wife actually has a record coming out too, which interestingly enough, I did the best solo I've ever done in my life on her record.
Nice.
Yeah, it's my favorite solo I've ever done on my own. I usually don't love my own stuff, but it's like, oh man, and I did it here too, 2 takes.
Nice.
And so that's going to come out in this year coming up. Kieran Music is what her thing is. KieranMusic.com. And yeah, that's about it. I mean, just trying to thrive in this, somewhat unthriving community.
Right.
It's like trying, man.
Do you have any gigs around town or anything?
Yeah, May 19th, we're going to be playing at Joe's Pub. That's our record release.
Okay.
That's the only one I have in town of my own, and out of town I got some other things. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what day of the week is. I might try
That's
to make that out. Friday night.
Yeah, 7 o'clock set. One
Okay.
set.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Okay. Thanks, man.
All right, buddy. We'll see you soon.
Take care.
All right. Thank you.
I really like Rez's drive to keep doing his own thing, pushing the boundaries a little and not resting on his laurels. Rez is an inspirational person, and I really enjoyed talking to him. If you enjoyed our conversation, check out this interview I did with someone who wrote a fantastic book on a person that was massively influential to me, Lenny Bro. Click on this video and listen in on my conversation with a person who probably knows more about Lenny than anyone.